The man who just stepped into the confines of a New York City prison was arrested a few hours ago on a charge of felonious assault. His name is Gregg, Pete Gregg. Under our American system, Pete Gregg is considered innocent until he is proven guilty or innocent in the trial that awaits him perhaps a month or two away. You will be with us as we take a hard look at a system, a cruel choice, which too often jails the innocent man who is poor and lets the professional criminal go free. That system is bail, and the choice is this: bail or jail.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Conforti, aka Manny Faces, producer and host of Newsbeat. Welcome to another important episode where we challenge conventional wisdom with investigative journalism and original music to amplify issues that are too often obscured by mainstream media and other powers that be. Newsbeat is brought to you by Maury Creative Studios, a New York-based inbound marketing, sales enablement, client retention, and platinum HubSpot partner agency. Check them out at maurycreative.com. So, as the decades-old audio featured in our opening states, we're tackling money bail, the antiquated, ruthless, and unconstitutional system pervading American criminal justice that commoditizes the freedom of those accused and criminalizes poverty in the process. Now, although this issue has been receiving some much-needed publicity recently, this is not a new problem. The clip you just heard was from a TV show called All America Wants to Know, which aired in the 60s, for example. In fact, excessive bail has been a contentious issue since the founding of this country, and since then, the so-called land of the free has ironically evolved into the largest prison state in the world, and one of only two nations left on the planet with a for-profit bail system. Now, stats only tell part of the brutal story, but they're important. There are currently more than 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States. And wait for it, hundreds of thousands of these folks have never even been convicted of a crime. They simply didn't have the money to make bail. The longer they stay inside, away from loved ones, unable to work, in crappy conditions, the more likely they'll cop to a plea too, regardless of whether they're innocent or not, just to get the hell out. It's a vicious cycle that, by design, means the richer you are, the less likely it is you'll ever see the inside of a jail cell. And conversely, if you're poor, you're not going home anytime soon. Exposing this sinister system in further detail for us is award-winning journalist Bryce Covert.
Today, arrestees make up 70% of the jail population. So these are people who are legally innocent.
Sam Brook, Deputy Legal Director of the Economic Justice Project at Southern Poverty Law Center.
If a system is using money bail to detain people without doing any inquiry into their ability to pay, that is absolutely unconstitutional.
And Peter Goldberg and Terrence Bogans of the nonprofit Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, one of a growing list of groups trying to end the cash bail system once and for all.
Bail is sort of the grease in the wheels of this machine that just churns out misery and incarceration.
There's nothing in the law saying that based on a charge, there's some cap for the amount of bail or bond that's set in a case.
Our special musical guest this episode, Brooklyn-based hip-hop artist and educator, Rabbi Darkside. Well, here it is. This is Freedom for Sale, how money bail crushes America's poor and inflates the world's largest prison state.
As the, war on drugs and focus on law and order and fears of crime really swelled in the 1970s and 1980s, bail amounts and then the population assessed with bail really started to swell as well. And that was aided by a shift from bail being something that was just meant to make sure you come back to court to it also being something that was meant to try and detain people who are a threat to public safety. Today, arrestees make up 70% of the jail population. So these are people who are legally innocent. In our system, you are innocent until proven guilty. These are people who have been arrested and charged with a crime, but have not gone through a court hearing to assess whether or not they are guilty of what they've been charged with. And they are sitting in jail and making up a huge portion of our jail population. I had never personally been in a courtroom for a bail hearing, and of course my experience in New Orleans was specific to the particular court I was in, which was New Orleans Criminal Court. But I was really struck by two things at once that felt sort of jarring to be put together. One was just sort of how mundane the proceedings appeared to be to those who were in charge, the judge, the DA, the court employees. But at the same time, you look over to the people, the defendants themselves, and they are in this courtroom in orange jumpsuits. They are shackled, not just at their wrists, but also at their waist and feet. And it's very clear that their movements and their ability to speak on their own behalf are extremely limited. And for most of these people, this is the first time this is happening to them.
If you are using money bail, if a system is using money bail to detain people without doing any inquiry into their ability to pay, that is absolutely unconstitutional. And every court decision that has been made on this point has reached that conclusion. There have been a number of different cases. Usually they're recent and in district courts, but there have been historic ones as well that have made clear that if our criminal justice system is discriminating based on wealth, then that means that you are engaging in impermissible discrimination, and it is going to be unconstitutional in violation of the Equal Protection Clause. Now, that is not to say that everyone, therefore, should be released and there should never be anyone who is detained pre-trial. It is certainly constitutional and permissible to be detaining some individuals if you go through the right process, if you're doing an actual meaningful inquiry into why there might be a need to do this. But that is the rare exception. I think the critical thing for folks to realize about our bail system is that when we have infused money into it, what we are really saying is that if people want to prove their innocence and not be punished, they have to buy their freedom. They have to pay bail just to get out of jail so they can come back and then have their day in court. And so what we really have is a two-tiered system of justice that is treating the poor differently and punishing them more. And if we allow that to continue, then we have flipped the presumption of innocence, innocent until proven guilty, on its head. Because if people are being forced to wait in jail until they can get a court date, they are treated as though they're guilty, even if they ultimately prove that they're innocent. I think this is important to understand. We usually talk about there being about 2.3 million people locked up at any one time in the United States on any given day. And of that 2.3 million, this is including both people who are in prison serving long sentences and also people in local jails. About a fourth of that population, 600,000, is actually sitting in a local jail. They are not in a prison, they're in a local jail. And of that figure, that 600,000, about 400,000, so about 1 in 6 of the total pie we're talking about, are there pre-adjudication. So that means they're there waiting for a trial. They're there waiting to find out whether they're guilty or not. They're innocent. They're presumed innocent at that point.
Shackled without conviction, no testimony or witness. Not guilty, only accused, so the presumption is innocence. Treated like a prisoner, no trial while it travail. How vile. This is a product of money bail. Stuck in jail with but a prayer. Money tipping the scales in favor of the accused who can pay their way out of there. Wealth discrimination, raise rates of incarceration. A practice that's illegal in every nation but here. See, money as bail, prejudicial as hell. It's hard to prove your freedom from the inside of a cell. Look into the numbers and see what it reveals. Pre-adjudication population 1 in 6 and swells. More systematic targeting of brown and black males and those without a savings whose finances are frail. If you're anything like me, you don't have a grand to spare. But what's $10,000 to a multimillionaire?
If you're arrested and brought to your first hearing and you're assessed a bail amount, you basically have two options. One is to come up with the full amount of money on your own. And if you have that, you can hand it to the court as basically a deposit. And then when you come back to court for your actual court case to be heard, you'll get that full amount refunded to you. Most people do not have it on hand. For a felony, the typical amount is $10,000, and about half the people in this country would struggle to cover just a $400 emergency. So most people are not going to be able to come up with that. So the other option is to have someone, a family member or a friend, go to a bail bondsman and have them bail you out. And that works pretty differently because typically what a bail bondsman will require is a 10% payment of your full bail amount. So let's say it's $10,000. You owe them 10% of that, or your friend or family, most likely. And then they will act as a guarantor for the rest to the court, saying that you'll come back to court on your date, and that if you don't come back, they'll be on the hook. That 10% amount is never refunded to you. The bail bond industry argues that it's necessary, at least in part because they're ensuring that people are showing back up to court. You know, their sort of whole shtick is that people won't come back to court unless we're there hunting down our clients and forcing them back into the courtroom. I think that's really kind of the whole thing that Dog the Bounty Hunter has going on with his show. Not having watched it, that seems to be a lot of what he's doing is hunting down bail skippers and bringing them back to court.
Go, Lou, on the ground. You're under arrest, you got it? I am a lawman on a mission from God. When I say freeze, they know what I'm saying.
In reality, first of all, that's not really what they're doing. You know, they're often not on the hook for paying the bail amount when someone skips bail. So they often, that's not even often their role.
Before coming to the Brooklyn Community Bail Fund, I was a public defender here in Brooklyn. And essentially judges have outright discretion, right? So there's nothing in the law saying that based on a charge, there's some cap for the amount of bail or bond that's set in a case. So in the same way where a judge would have the authority to release someone on their own recognizance on a felony, they can also set, a very high bail on the misdemeanor.
This year, over 10,000 people simply charged with a misdemeanor with bail at $2,000 or less won't be able to afford it and will be sent to Rikers Island. And nearly 90% of folks who have bail set at $1,000 can't afford it and are going to jail. And this isn't some dirty secret. This is well known for everyone who spends any time in the courts, and it's well known by the prosecutors when they're requesting bail, and it's well known by the judges when they're setting it. And in this way, and folks have really been hitting on this for some time, bail is sort of the grease in the wheels of this machine that just churns out misery and incarceration. Because in New York, we arrest close to 250,000 folks for misdemeanors every year, and there's no way that those cases can be tried in any meaningful way. And with bail, folks get sent to jail, and then when they're offered the guilty plea, they take it.
I think that whether a prosecutor is doing this intentionally or not, if a person is locked in jail and waiting for a trial date that may be weeks or even months away, and they are given a plea offer, even though they believe that they are innocent, they have an impossible dilemma in front of them. Do they take the plea, often for time served, that allows them to get out immediately and to return to their family and to their loved ones, to try to figure out if they can get that job back, to make sure that they're looking after their family and those that they care for and love? Or do they languish in jail, in locked in confinement, often locked in confinement for hours on the day, where they're only able to get outside, if at all, for a short period of time each day, and just stuck there for months simply because they can't afford to pay it, all so they can finally have that fundamental right of proving their innocence in front of a judge or a jury.
This is a problem that affects our most vulnerable individuals, but also in small amounts of bail, but also affects folks accused of more serious charges, right? Khalif Browder, he's known as the most tragic circumstance here.
You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, but the way the system is you're guilty till proven innocent. I want to go home, and it's like they're not letting me go home.
To go home, Khalif's mother, Vanita Browder, needed to post bail of $3,000. Money, she said, she just didn't have.
We're
Court records show Khalif had attempted suicide at least 6 times, spent 1,110 days behind bars, more than 800 of those in solitary confinement. His court date postponed more than 30 times. He endured all this having never been given a trial, never convicted of a crime.
A man jailed for 3 years in Rikers Island prison with no charges brought against him has committed suicide. 22-year-old Khalif Browder was detained in the infamous prison in New York City where he endured beatings, mental abuse, and long stretches of solitary confinement.
Not a public threat, not a risk of flight. I just want to prove my innocence, go home and reunite. Wrong place, wrong time. Confinement out of consequence. Coulda, shoulda let me go of my own recognizance. I couldn't in good conscience let my papa pay a bondsman. Now the list of problems is growing, I can't dodge them. Waiting for a trial date, miss my sis and mother. No way I would be caught out running from a bounty hunter. They all know the truth, wrote it, sent it to their mailbox. Now I'm finding out hell's hot from the inside of this cell block. Swear to God, another week locked up feels like it's killing me. Court-appointed lawyer in here saying take the guilty plea. Kidding me? Know all about this prison complex industry. Just never thought I'd be inside fighting to keep my sanity. Then the panic sets in, I can barely gasp for air. If you're anything like me, you didn't have a grand to spare.
In the 1960s, the federal government passed what's known as the Bail Reform Act. This effectively did away with money bail in the federal court system. And in the federal court system now, there are still rare circumstances where money bail might be used. You might hear of someone having to post $1 million bail because they have, because they're incredibly wealthy, they have all these resources. But that would only be done after a judge has concluded that they can afford to pay it. It's never going to be done as a way of preventing them from getting their liberty. And so in Alabama, now the 77 largest municipalities that have municipal courts have all switched their system to this process where they're no longer using money bail, at least in the vast majority of cases. There are some small exceptions to that, for example, if a failure to appear or something like that. But in the vast majority of cases, people will be getting out right away. And I say 77, that represents about 95% of the municipal courts in Alabama. So this is a pretty sizable chunk. But then we look across the country. New Jersey passed a statute a year and a month ago that eliminated the use of money bail in New Jersey.
Let me tell you what this is all about. The bail bonds community has made a fortune over the years, predominantly off of the poor in New Jersey. And we now are stopping them from doing that. And they're pissed. Too bad. You shouldn't be making money off the poor that way.
Chicago is looking at a rule that would do the same thing there. Maryland is looking at a rule that would affect all of its courts in the same way. So you're seeing a profound move in different jurisdictions across the country. This was just announced by Governor Cuomo in his State of the State address in New York, that he wants to see bail reform pushed much more aggressively in the state of New York to make sure that no one there is being locked up just because they can't afford to pay.
Let's be painfully honest. The truth is that Our Lady Justice is still not colorblind, and her scales are still not balanced. Our bail system is biased against the poor. Too many jails are cruel and inhumane, and our court system is too slow. The blunt, ugly reality is that too often, if you can make bail, you are set free, and if you are too poor to make bail, you are punished. We must reform our bail system so that a person is only held if a judge finds either a significant flight risk or a real threat to public safety.
The bail reform movement does not seem to split really along red and blue lines in the way you might think. Kentucky is an example of a place that's not some deep blue state that has enacted really meaningful bail reform. And there's efforts underway currently. There's a big push in California. Maybe that doesn't sound surprising, but there's also pushes in Arizona and Texas and Nebraska. And I think you see people getting interested in this from the conservative side for a couple of reasons. One is, people are worried about the cost of jailing so many innocent people, which is a legitimate concern. It costs a lot to keep people incarcerated. You see that also in a bill that was put forward this year, co-sponsored by Kamala Harris of California and Rand Paul, who's definitely not a real fighting liberal.
On the issue of bail reform and the work that Rand and I are doing together, it's about recognizing that for some of the lowest level offenses, nonviolent offenses, the only difference between someone being in jail pre-trial or being out is if they can afford to write a check. And that's just not fair, it's not right, and it's not reflective of a system of justice that's supposed to be blind to who you are in terms of your wealth. A wealthy person should not have freedom while a working person can't, just because they can't pay for it for the same crime.
One of the things that affected me more than anything was the story of Khalif Browder. It was in the New Yorker a couple years ago. 16-year-old kid accused of stealing a backpack. He was put in prison with a $3,000 bail, but he spent 3 years in prison without a trial. That shouldn't happen in America. He tried to commit suicide. He was beaten in prison. It was just awful. And he eventually did commit suicide. That shouldn't happen in our country. I want to go home, and it's like they're not letting me go home.
I think, first of all, Americans do not understand the extent of this problem. I think they assume, much as I did, that the share of people who are behind bars because they can't afford bail is small. I also think, generally speaking, Americans think that the people who are behind bars have been found to be guilty of a crime, and that instead, by and large, at least in the jail population, it's people who haven't even had their court hearing yet. I think there's also this conception that the bail bond industry is this sort of mom and pop shop bail bondsman who is doing you this real great favor by bailing you out and then, doing society some good by making sure that people come back to court hearings and sort of keeping a good eye on them. When in reality, they're not mom and pop shops. They're mostly underwritten by 9 pretty big insurance firms. It's a $2 billion annual industry, so this is not just some, small little pocket of the finance world. That money is mostly being made off of these 10% commissions that they take on people's bails that people don't get back. There is not great data to show that they are helping to make sure that people come back to court. There's not even data to show that they're even really keeping us safe.
I want to go home, and it's like they're not letting me go home.
It's hard to prove your freedom from the inside of a cell. Cursed to sit and dwell, counting days like coffin nails. Bondsmen count commissions while we count funeral bells. Innocence gets lost while we lose innocent selves. Money, bail, and business in a system fraught with fails. We can count statistics and the truths that they tell. Account the tax it takes on harmless teens held in prison. Account the money bounty hunters make on television. Count the lies proliferated, the cost of incarceration. Can we count on politicians to lead reformation? Some counties and states have already ended the practice. And since the 1960s, federal bail's been cashless, yet we still count the tragic misdemeanor accusations that can scar a life forever for a lack of stack of paper. We fight for legacies and families in despair. If you're anything like them, you wouldn't have a grand to spare.
Newsbeat is produced and distributed by Maury Creative Studios, MauryCreative.com. The producer of Newsbeat is me, Mike Conforti, aka Manny Faces. The editor-in-chief of Newsbeat is Christopher Twarowski. The managing editor of Newsbeat is Rashed Mian. The executive producer of Newsbeat is Jed Maury. Show notes, our Behind the Beat blog, and more about us can be found on the web at www.usnewsbeat.com. Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Thanks for listening.